I spoke with a lot of colleagues that had a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear because they were sending in employees many times working alone, right? So many they were working on crews, and now I'm working alone on a night shift that I'm not familiar with. So there was a lot of, I think, anxiety about that. They were seeing behaviors change because of some of the protection requirements that we were asking employees to perform, and then we were taking some of those protections away, and then we're putting them back on. So there was a tremendous amount, I think, of behavior pressure, on the organizations. So I think I would sum it up, with the folks that I've talked with, is that they feel like that they've lost, right, maybe 5 or 6 years. I'm using that term loosely. They've lost time and some of their behavior, or their culture that they were really shooting for. So yeah. So I would say that. I mean, I did notice for a time that we were seeing less injury, but I'm not quite sure that we were recording, quite as well as we had in the past either, right? So maybe some of those injuries or illnesses were different. So I don't know. I think it's going to take us years to unravel this, and to see what impact that it had. But uh, I- most, I think most of my colleagues are in the manufacturing side of things, so they were pressing on with trying to do work in the midst of a pandemic, and but I think it's pretty solidly their feeling was it is may have been the hardest 2 years of their career. So, and I'm sure you've heard a lot the same. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, welcome to the Safeopedia podcast, Scott. It's great to have you here. And guess for those of you who are listening, we're speaking with Scott Gaddis. He's the Vice President of Global Practice Leader, Safety and Health at Intelex Technologies Inc. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks. Great to be here.
We're going to get back to what Scott and I was talking about in just a moment. But first, Scott, why don't you share with everybody, how did you land in the world of occupational health and safety? Because you've got quite a long history here.
Yeah, I actually over 30 years of history, believe it or not. So I think I'm probably one of the older ones that's still continuing to practice. But I've been asked that question before. Maybe by some luck and good fortune, I really had an unusual path to my career choice, meaning that I landed in a career field that I could really relate to. And I don't think a lot of people know this, but I didn't go to college for 2 years after I graduated high school, and I decided to go and work for my family, which owned a construction business. And I really enjoyed the work, but I was often asked to take a lot of risk that I thought really jeopardized my own safety and health. And I didn't know a lot, at that time. I was, probably 18. So even without knowing a lot, at times I was fearful, of the work that I was doing. And so soon after that, I decided to go to college, and there was a brand new engineering program, and their enticement into that program was the promise of good job placement after I graduated. So that was the mid 80s. The program was called Occupational Safety Engineering. And I don't think a lot of people knew about it, or even if it was a good career choice. And I remember, factually, right, when I came home and I was telling my family I was going to go after this degree in this field of study, they were quite convinced that that I was never going to get a job. So needless to say, I mean, long story short, I took my first class called The Fundamentals of Occupational Safety, and I was hooked. I absolutely loved learning about the people that I was going to be asked later to protect.
Yeah, no, I remember the fundamentals of OHS, especially way back then. And we've come a long way. We really have, because back then we were really focusing more on the technical, right? And making
Yeah.
sure that you really had your emergency plan lined up, that you really were looking more at those technical step by steps, and we've progressed so
No,
far in
yeah,
our
no, we
field.
really did. I mean, even then, right, in the mid 80s, we were only about a decade and a half from, the passing of the OSHA Act. So everything was very compliance minded, 1910 and 1926 were the two standards that kind of come to my mind, is that I was asked to learn
Mhm.
really what those regulations covered and those standards and how to employ those in the workplace. So not a lot else, other than building compliance. It was later that I really started to learn, the effects of what this career choice was to do to me, and driving, some of my passions.
Yeah, and we for those of you who are listening, Scott is in America and I'm in
Hmm.
Canada, so he's going to be referring to OSHA a lot, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration down in
Right.
the United States. Did I get that one right?
You did,
Okay,
absolutely.
thank you. And up here in Canada, where I am, I'm going to be probably referring to our Ministry of Labor because we have our Occupational Health and Safety Act, just so that you know what's going on here. But I'm totally with you about when starting out in health and safety, it was so much about compliance. I remember getting that green book and saying, learn this like a Bible. This is all you really need to be doing. And as a social worker, because I bring that in my knapsack, I
Right,
was kind of like, okay, but I thought I was working with people here. What's
right,
going on?
absolutely.
I want to go back to what you said about you started in construction
Hmm.
and it was a family business. And even at that young age, you were being asked to do things that were very risky and made you feel unsettled.
It really was. I mean, and they were doing commercial construction, so it was not only me. I think one of the things would have been, if it had been residential and construction, I would have been able to really kind of face that, head on, and
Mhm.
to tell, my family that I wasn't willing to do certain things. But in commercial construction, where you may have hundreds or even 1,000, other contractors on site, it became very difficult for me to do that. Right, I was almost overcome with the decisions of others. So, at times I was really impacted by the fact that I thought that I was trying to do things that had a level of risk that I was not certain of, but I would find myself still making those decisions to do them, almost from a factor that I was isolated. I maybe was not seen, or I wasn't experienced enough, and I just simply did not have at that time the wisdom to push back on them and say, I'm not going to do it this way. Right, so that really does come from, one, support from, I think, a management team, or wisdom and knowledge on your side to say that there are certain things that I just simply won't cross a line for. So I learned a lot in a couple of years about what is right and what's wrong. I also learned that maybe I had a lot more what we sometimes call common sense than others around me. So I just was not as big of a risk taker as other people were.
And thank you for sharing that, because I think what you're sharing here is very important.
Hmm.
Sometimes when an incident happens or an actual accident, we're looking back saying, oh, well, how could that happen? Didn't they have common
Right.
sense to see this? But the fact is that there's so many more onion layers in what we're
Right.
having to deal with. We deal with people making decisions, people having different life experiences, right? In order to be able to assess what might actually be a risk. Their perceptions are different. I was talking to
Hmm.
JC about that the other day. Now, how and a young worker is a vulnerable worker is our terminology for exactly that reason. They don't have the wisdom and the experience in order to gauge. So how, when you became into management and leadership, do you think that those experiences as a younger worker impacted your way of doing health and safety leadership and management?
Oh, it absolutely did. I mean, I grew up in that environment. I lived on a farm when I was younger, or I was always adjacent to the family business. So I was always on what we called the construction area, even when I was not working. So I learned, quite a lot about, what was good and what was bad, what was a risk and what was not a risk. So I did have a lot more knowledge than maybe some that are coming into the workforce. And I think, one of the biggest challenges for us is that, much of our work is driving compliance, but most of our work, right, is on the people side of what I call this business that we're in. And we are that gate between what they could do and what they should do, right? So we are that mediator, that person that's building, that's coaching, that's mentoring, that's training and developing this person to make better decisions. And that begins immediately upon the time that they're hired, right? So we have to really employ ourselves in that person's life from the day that they come to work for us. And that's different for many organizations that put someone in the workforce and wish the very best, right? It just simply does not work that way, at least and the benefit for what you're trying to do and protecting people, and trying to get them home every single day.
So at the beginning of our chat, you were talking about how people lost time
Hmm.
being through COVID period, and you were talking about how it had an impact on culture. Can you maybe dive a little bit more into what you were thinking there for our listeners?
Yeah, I think, and it's a word, right? This whole idea about culture. Um, everyone has a culture. We talk about safety culture, we talk about work culture, but you can believe me when I say that we're all working in the midst of culture, and some of the culture may be good, some of it may not be as good, it may be substandard. But when I think about culture, and especially when I think about it in the brevity of this interview, it's truly about these people, right, that we're asked to protect. And for me, it's this desire to really return colleagues back to, I've been blessed to work with a lot of colleagues over the years, but getting them back to their families every single day is the reason that I get up in the morning. When I talk about the colleagues that I referred to earlier in our interview, it's their reason too, right? Is that I think as safety and health professionals, we all share that same value. Not that other things are not important, but when it comes to what our oath is to the people that work with us, it's the well-being of those people, and getting them home to their families is how we judge our overall success. That even ranks well over compliance, of an organization. So I think that's it. I think it's the value that we've placed on the people that are in our charge, and making sure that we can get them home to their families. And I think the COVID has really demonstrated that at times, we were very fearful that we could not do that because we didn't have enough information. We didn't have enough control of that situation at times to really tell ourselves, or at least to feel good that we're able to do that.
And I think what you're saying resonates for sure. That we do have an oath that when we come in to do this kind of work, I always, and you know this about me, I've kind of called the
Hmm.
health and safety professional like the social worker, right,
Yeah,
of the business. You know that about me. And I like how you say like people in our charge that we work with,
right.
right? Because that's very important that you value that individuals have chosen to work at a company. They have chosen to rent their time for you in an exchange, right? So and they also have rights in work to be protected and safe and not get hurt. And so I
Right.
want to pull the thread a little bit on that, because you said when you were starting in construction, because you had more of a sense about what risks perception was, because you were more adverse to taking risks, and
Hmm.
that's fine. Um, but we always say in health and safety, well, you have the right to refuse work. you have the right to not be doing dangerous work. But then, as we've seen time and time and again, people are getting into those situations,
Right.
right? So, as a leader who has helped guide numerous teams throughout your career, what are your recommendations to those EHS professionals listening right now, saying, "Well, Scott, what can I be doing to help safeguard these workers so that they're not feeling that they have to do unsafe work?" What have you found that has worked over the years?
Yeah, and I've matured in this craft, right? So I did start in a time where we did run very compliance-based programs. However, even kind of preceding that question that you asked, Tamara, is that there were some key links of performance that I desired to have. That what was keeping me from reaching the goals that I really wanted to reach. So I would say that early on, we were asked to figure out these complex problems mostly on the compliance side. But when it comes down to the behaviors that we want to see and where we find most of our misgivings, with our employees is when they don't have really clear, concise a policy or procedure to follow. And this happens to be one of those things is that, do you have a lone worker policy? Do I have a right to refuse policy in my organization? And do I support that with action? And, one of the first things that I normally do with an organization is I write a couple of those policies, right? If we don't have one, let's write a policy on right to refuse. And basically what that says is that if I find myself doing an activity that I don't feel good about, right? And I always left those very open is that, me feeling good about something, right? Me feeling okay to proceed with a work task may be totally different than what someone else may feel about that work task, right? So it's all based on really perceptions and understanding and education and training, but it's at least that window into someone and how they think and how they would like to progress with this problem, because they may take a lot more risk in doing something if they feel that they have to do it. So I think that those are probably the two critical pieces of information, is to have things in place that allows them to stop and talk about it. When I led Kimberly Clark, one of the first things that I did was I put together a very values-based program at one of the paper mills that I had. And one of the first things that I put down on paper and really communicated and trained against is a simple bullet point: is if you feel that you are doing an activity that jeopardizes your health, the safety of a coworker, you're to stop what you're doing and talk about it. And I even opened that up. I said, shut down a machine, shut down the plant if you have to, but absolutely stop what you're doing and have a conversation with someone with more experience, with knowledge. Pull me in as the safety leader and let's have that discussion, because your perceptions at the end of the day are very, very real, right? And it's my opportunity to have that discussion with you to notice if there's gaps in the management system or your knowledge in performing the tasks that I really want you to perform. So I think it's that. I think it's just open communication and having an organization that allows such things to happen, Tamara, is how I see that.
Now, I'm going to push a little bit more here
Hmm.
because you have managed teams of thousands.
I have.
And I've heard this from other people when I'm in discussion and we talk about this. And it's like, I have teams of hundreds and thousands of people. I can't be talking to them all. So when we say that there's an action that you stop and you talk to somebody, um, how do we get around the fact that sometimes you end up talking to somebody who just kind of scuffs it off and says, do it anyway? And then you have an incident land at your doorstep,
Hmm.
right? So what is your recommendations to people to try to have some actions that are executable, but also is going to be ensuring that they're being alerted in case unsafe work is actually being done?
Right, right. I think a couple of things come to mind. I mean, we could probably talk about this one subject for 2 hours, but a couple of things that I would do, and I did, I did lead, a couple of big organizations, and it always gets more difficult, so when you have 500 or 600 people to take care of, certainly you can direct a program in a certain way. But, at one time I had 60,000 employees that were logically, under the purview of a safety and health program, right? When I led a corporate team, so it certainly gets more difficult. But I would handle this a couple of ways. At an employee level, I think we've all, if I'm talking with EH&S professionals, on this podcast, we all have those employees. We all have those 5 or 6 employees that are the risk takers in the work environment, and you do have to treat them much differently than you have someone that listens, that is really doing what you desire them to do. In those times, I've done a couple of things. I've assigned them mentors and coaches, so someone that's going to sit with them on a daily or a weekly basis to monitor the work, to make sure that they're making improvements to the things that they are supposed to do versus what they've been witnessed doing. So I've been very successful doing that. And then, regrettably, at times I've terminated some of those employees that just simply did not get it. If they continue to be a risk taker to a degree where I think that they're going to hurt themselves or someone else in the organization, I've been very bold enough to say, we're going to take you out of the organization. And I say that not in a punitive way, but at the end of the day, I want to make sure that that person does not, become injured or become ill because of the things that they do in a work environment. So sometimes you do have to go to that level of behavior to protect the organization and that person. The second thing is that most of these problems that I see occur in 2 places. They occur at the value at the top of the organization. So we have a senior management team that allows such things to happen. So as a safety and health professionals, you do have to work with the management team to increase value. How do we do that? By building their participation in the program. On the management teams that I were a part of, they did training, they did crew turnovers with with value statements. They would send out, quarterly letters talking about value. So really what you need to see from that level of organization is their value for the program that you've implemented at your sites. More of the problem is at the mid-level, right? So you have supervisors, you have managers that are directing work, and safety and health and environment. Those happen to be one part, right, of how they are judged with success. So they have asset effectiveness, they have production, quality, all these other things, right? So certainly it is a minefield when you're trying to get them directed into one area. So again, as a safety and health professional, you have to build action plans for all of the organizations that I had. I had safety and health and even environmental objectives for mid managers to make sure that I was able to judge them on increasing performance value for the organizations. And what that meant for me is, have you demonstrated that you can take care of this particular part of the organization? And I measured that by behaviors. I measured that by their engagements with the workforce. And at the end of the day, I measured it with trailing indicators such as injury and illness. If I were to see an area that was not performing well, I would go to the mid-level manager, and we would have that discussion why those things were happening, and then I would audit the teams to make sure that things were going to go well. So there's a couple of ways to do it. I mean, there's probably 10 ways to do it, but those are a couple of things that come off the top of my mind.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. There's a lot of great nuggets in there, audience, to listen, to get some ideas. And I'm going to pull one of the threads that you did talk about, which was coaching.
Mhm.
Right? Coaching is a wonderful tool that's underused. So maybe you could share ways that you've used coaching at different levels, because I can see there's coaching for the senior management level and coaching as well for the mid-level management. And it's not always just about the employee on the site that we need to put our focus on.
Yeah, and I'm often asked this too, is that you have coaching opportunity throughout the organization. I don't always leave in at coaching and mentoring, but it is an important part. And Tamara, we talked, a lot about this, but when you look at it, and if I had this imaginary slide right for this podcast, you have this management system that really kind of resides right outside of your program, and you're always looking at it, right? You're always testing it. You're always seeing if there's fractures or these gaps in the management system. But really what levers that, or what makes that move, or what I think are four elements, is that, are we compliant, right? Are the people that are working for us in a compliant work environment? Have I taken care of things like lockout, tag out, right? And have I taken care of things like fire safety? So, there's a myriad of those things that we could talk about, but those are table stakes, and that changes behavior, not only at the end of the organization, so that front line of the organization, but at a senior management team. So we all have skin in the game when we talk about compliance. So it really is a behavior, or a driver of behavior in the organization. I think the second element is how well we are in developing capability throughout the organization. And the two largest organizations that I had is that I mandated training from the front line all the way up to the boardroom. And a lot of people look at me like I've lost my mind when I say that, but I had plant managers in lockout, tagout training, and confined space training, and universal precautions training. Well, why did I do that? Well, it was to increase value and to increase the behaviors that I was expecting to see, not only at the front line, but actually at the top of the organization. So developing capability throughout an organization develops the behaviors that you're really desiring to see. And then I think this third element, and I often talk about this, is that you do have to work with your senior management teams much differently than maybe you would think, in regard to driving the behaviors that you want. Is that they have to see value, and that's normally communicated to them as return on investment, right? Is they always want to know what you're trying to do, and does it pay a dividend? Do I get some type of positive reflection through this investment that you're wanting to make? And when you're talking about behaviors, right, in the organization, those get really, really soft. So you have to kind of pull that back and say, these are the tangible things that I know will happen if we do this particular way. Maybe the biggest thing, right, of this particular question that you've asked is that, investing in people. I think safety is a safety-based business, and for the safety and health professional to build effective relationships with people, it's just the most important thing that we do. Um, working at a plant level for maybe the first 5 or 10 years of my life, I knew every employee by their first name. I made it a point to talk to them about their families, their hobbies, even their fears about things. And at times I would show up at their kids' ball games. I'd show up at a piano recital. I would show up at things to show that I cared about them as a person, right? And in addition, when you do things like that, like spending time in training and building capability in the workforce, if you do it well, you find that people participate in programming. And what you're really trying to do as a professional is to get them to partner with you to drive business results. But it's all about relationships. So, as I've kind of talked about that, all of those different elements, it is literally all about building effective relationships in the process to get these goals that you care about.
Yeah, and I like what you were talking about, also knowing your audience when
Yeah.
you're speaking to people, what drives them, what's in it for them. It's just really the way it is in the world. And when you are talking about with senior management, their view is on what is the financial return.
No,
How is it
yeah.
going to increase productivity? And it's not that they're mean or anything, but that's their role in the business. So when
Yeah,
we're talking to them, I think we could
yeah.
do a whole podcast on this.
No, it really is. I mean, you as a professional, many times we think with our hearts, right? Is that, I started this podcast saying, I get up every day of my life wanting to protect people, to get them back to their families. And it's not the fact that other senior leaders, right, don't want to do that. They just have an expanded focus, right, that covers the entire business, so it's maintenance, operation, it's asset effectiveness, it's security. And the reality is that safety is a significant value for the organizations where you work, but it's not the only value in which your senior team is measured by. So, it is really imperative that we discuss things like initiatives with data, right? Is how is this going to benefit the overall business plan? Is it compliance? Is there an ROI? Does it require capital investment, or is it an expense? What type of resources are required? So I would say, and I usually talk about this, especially even with our clients trying to build on to their platforms, is that, bottom line is that senior leaders are very business savvy. Many of them have an MBA, and they require us and rely on us to speak to them in terms that they understand. And most of that being, what are the financial results? What is this return on investment that I expect, right? If you want to do that. And I would just make one more point too, is that, many times we go in asking for things that are off of business plan, right? And sometimes that's okay. But I would absolutely tell you as professionals is to look at what is the overall mission and vision for the business. What are you really trying to do with that business, and can I fit in programming to reflect that, right, to better that overall mission?
And it's interesting because I was talking to a director of operations
Hmm.
just this morning, and what you're saying resonates with what they were saying. It would be really great when safety professionals come and ask for budget, that they're putting it in the context of this
Yeah.
is the financial return for the business. They're putting it into context for operation and production. If we do X, this will help increase production by this, or increase productivity by that, or decrease the downtime, right? Because then they can take that to the C-suite, the financial people, and then that's in the world of how they look at the business. And so then it would be more open to getting the budgets that people are asking for. Is there something on point there? What are your thoughts from your
No,
experience?
I think you're exactly right. And it took me a long time to learn this. Maybe after being in those type of discussions with senior leaders. I think many times I walked into those type of meetings, and my basis of argument was, well, it's the right thing to do. And I think, many of us on this podcast, we've probably thought that, right? And many times it is the right thing to do, but that's not what a senior management team needs to hear. Uh, for most functional support organizations, and when I talk about that, that really does include environmental health and safety, much of our budget is dedicated to what is called cost avoidance, right? Is that I have to do these things to avoid this negative thing happening to the organization. We need to change that talk and talk about it as an investment. And Tamara, you said it well, is that there are all types of returns on investment that we can talk about, but it's going to require us to understand the data. It's going to require us to understand what a loss run report is, what medical costs are, right? What time away from work means. What does it mean when we terminate someone because of injury? How much cost is required to bring a new person on? We got training time. So there's a lot of data that kind of lays out there, but we usually don't use it because we don't understand it well enough, right? We don't have those systems to really manage that data in a way that we can communicate it easily.
And I'm going to share a little secret with our audience, and you may know this already. Become best friends with the chief financial officer.
Yeah, it's true.
They love to talk to people about ways of increasing revenue and saving money, and they're very friendly people, actually. I couldn't believe it when I started networking and doing that. They're super friendly and giving of ideas and wanting to coach people on how to better understand the finances of a business, right? And that would be kind of like not even in most of our perception of people to network. What are your thoughts on that advice?
No, I think you're exactly right. I mean, when I was younger, I would, I really had an appetite to understand what other functions of the business, did. I knew what I was doing, as an EHS professional, but I really did want to understand what the finance leader was doing, what their day-to-day actions were, quality, asset effectiveness, all of those folks were really important. So I would shadow them, right? I would spend time trying to understand, what kept them up at night, right? What are the business profiles that they really needed to follow and to close in with a management system. So I wholeheartedly agree with that. The more we understand about the businesses in which we work, the better our roles are. And I've said this to a lot of folks, and I teach a lot on management systems, is that we know more about management systems than almost anyone in our organizations in which we work. Ours are very defined. We absolutely use our management systems to drive programs. So look at how other functional support organizations affect your particular management systems and how a safety management system may affect theirs. Hopefully, they're all interwoven and they're working very, very well. But by doing, activities like that, you really do start to see some of these gaps that need to be filled that not only help your program, but the programs of others in the organization. I often give this, when you do root cause analysis, right, in safety and health, I can tell you that if you do that well, that translates very easily over to quality, over process control, over production, right? There's still these basic causes that are happening in the organization that allows us to all grow and to become even more interwoven together. So yeah, I told that's a long way to say absolutely. I agree with you, Tamara.
No, thank you. And the power of networking is just phenomenal. Thank you so much, Scott, for joining us. Well, I know we are coming down to the end of our time. We could just continue on. We always have
We
great
could.
conversations. So I do understand also, though, that you're going to be speaking at the EH&S Congress in September in Berlin. Tell us about that. What are you talking about?
I am. I have a really heavy speaking schedule for the next 2 months. I mean, I just finished up at ASSP. I'm doing this one, NSC, and so a lot of stuff. But I'm really excited, for EHS Congress in Berlin. I'm going to speak on the subject going from good to great, transforming safety and health and technology with technology. And I think one of the greatest opportunities that I've had working for Intelex, I spent almost 30 years as a practitioner in consumer goods or pharmaceuticals. And then about 4 years ago, I left that to join Intelex. And it was almost demanded, by the company when I started, is that I work as a safety and health practitioner and work with our teams on how technology helps me, as a practitioner be successful. So I just never stepped far away from the person that I was before I joined Intellect. So my session will be, the changes that we see in technology over the next decade and how I think these changes will impact the safety professionals. So I'm going to talk about how technology can improve the safety management system with more prescriptive content features and a lot of that we're doing now, Intellect is really diving deep in filling these management system gaps. So that's, I think, is a very exciting. And then I'll talk about, technology. What are these opportunities to get better performance, and even some of those things that I think may threaten success. I was talking with one of our clients, and as machine learning and AI becomes more predominant in operations, can we keep ahead of that as safety professionals with training and capability? Do we know all of the risk that are being introduced into some of those things? And so I'll talk about that. And then I'll maybe end it this way, since I believe, safety is a people business, going from good to great. I think it still requires heavy participation from the front line. So I'm going to talk about three available areas that have very low entry points that you can implement now to drive employee engagement. So I'll talk a little bit about our safety and engagement scoring and how we do that through key metrics learning, how we develop communication and micro learning, through technology. And then honestly, I'll talk a little bit about making sure that we can get a mobile device in the hands of people so they can participate in your safety and health process, and hopefully partner with you, right, in driving success. So I think it's an exciting, topic to be talking about. But maybe I'll end with this. We commissioned a survey not too many months ago. We talked to 700 safety professionals from over 10 countries, and we asked one question: what is your biggest safety and health challenge that you are facing today? And over 40% of them said improving employee participation in safety programs was their biggest challenge. So I think that it's important for me to talk about what can we do as professionals using technologies to increase participation. So that's really what I'm going to talk about.
Sounds amazing. I look forward to hearing you speak. And thank you again for joining us on the Safepedia podcast. This has been amazing. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. And link in with me. I'm always willing to talk to anyone about something that I really love, which is safety and health.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for another great episode. I'm Tamara Paris, and that was Scott Gaddis speaking with us. And he's going to be at the EH&S Congress September the 13th to the 14th in Berlin. You can check the description below for the link to register. And if you like the conversation, please click on the like button. If you want to hear more content like this, subscribe and we'll send you notifications. And if you're looking for great, credible health and safety content to share out with your network and your teams, visit us at safeopedia.com. Until next time, stay safe.